Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're embarking on a deep dive into some truly fascinating ancient texts, the Pācittiya rules. Imagine these as part of a remarkably detailed ethical code, designed for a vibrant community of monks centuries ago. Our mission for this deep dive is to really extract the core insights, the surprising facts, and what these rules tell us about human behavior and community building, even across millennia. Our sources for this exploration come directly from the Pācittiya sections of a monastic code.
Indeed. And the Pācittiya rules, they represent a category of, let's say, minor offenses within the ancient Buddhist monastic community. They required confession and correction. Think of them maybe as serious yellow cards, perhaps. Distinct from the really severe red card offenses like Vagga, which could actually lead to expulsion. We'll also see some minor foul offenses mentioned, like dukkata for broader infractions and dupasita for more like accidental slips. What's really fascinating here is that each rule typically originates from a specific incident, a transgression within the community. This highlights their practical rather than purely theoretical nature. They were designed to maintain harmony, discipline, and importantly, the good standing of the Sangha, the monastic order in the eyes of the lay community.
Okay, let's kick things off then. There's a fascinating rule that really tackles the power of our words. Pācittiya IV, concerning intentional lying. What's the origin story behind this one?
Right. So this rule, it arose from an incident involving a monk named Hathaka Sakyaputta. He was in a debate with some non-Buddhist ascetics, and, well, he used some rather deceptive tactics. When questioned, he actually defended himself, saying something like, "These ascetics are to be conquered by any means. Victory is not to be given to them."
The ends justify the means kind of argument.
Exactly. But the Buddha saw it differently. And this incident led directly to the rule against intentional lying, known in the text as Sampajana Musāvādavaggo. And the text is incredibly precise. It defines it as any speech, utterance, or verbal communication with the intention to deceive. Things like claiming to have seen what one hasn't seen or heard what one hasn't heard, and, vice versa.
That level of precise intent is fascinating. The text mentions before, during, and after the statement. Plus, setting aside your correct view. But how practical was that, really? I mean, could someone truly discern another's true state of mind just like that? It sounds incredibly challenging almost. Well, impossible to judge externally.
You're right, it is a high bar, and I think that speaks to the depth of the ethical consideration here. It's perhaps less about human judges perfectly knowing inner states and more about establishing an ideal of absolute integrity for a monk. The expectation was really that you knew your own intention. That's the core. But there are exemptions, which points to the practicality. Things like speaking accidentally or maybe joking, or if someone is, mentally incapacitated or considered insane, or the first offender in a new situation.
Okay, that makes sense. Building on that foundation of truthful speech, Pācittiya II tackles derogatory speech, basically, insulting people. What's the context for this one?
Oh, yes. This rule often involves the Vagga monks. They seem to pop up quite a bit.
The usual suspects?
Kind of, yeah. They were a group of 6 monks frequently implicated in rule breaking. In this case, they were quarreling and, well, insulting other monks in various ways. So to address this, the Buddha recounted a story. It's about Nandivisala the ox. This ox apparently refused to move a heavy cart when its master insulted it, calling it crooked or bad. But then when the master apologized and praised it, called it good or excellent, the ox just effortlessly pulled the load.
Huh. A sensitive ox.
Well, the moral was pretty clear. One should speak only what is pleasant, never what is unpleasant. And this led to the rule against omasabad, derogatory speech.
So it's really about the impact, the effect of your words, not just the words themselves.
Exactly. And the text gets incredibly detailed. It meticulously lists, I think it's 10 ways an insult can be delivered. It covers everything: birth, name, clan, even your job or craft, illness, physical appearance, past mistakes. It's a remarkably nuanced understanding of verbal abuse for the time.
10 categories. That's thorough.
It is. And here's where it gets really interesting. As you pointed out earlier, illnesses are generally considered low in these categories. But the text specifically states that diabetes, the term uses marmeo, is actually considered a high or distinguished illness.
Right. That detail is amazing.
Yeah.
Diabetes as high or distinguished, it completely flips our modern view. What could possibly explain that? Was it linked to maybe wealth or diet or something else entirely?
It's a truly surprising detail, isn't it? The text doesn't explicitly spell out why. But scholars speculate it might have been associated with a more affluent lifestyle, perhaps linked to a diet rich in sugars or sweets, which would distinguish it from illnesses maybe seen as resulting from poverty or poor sanitation.
Fascinating. A little window into the social hierarchy of health back then.
Exactly, it's these small details. Anyway, the rule itself distinguishes between the full Pācittiya offense, that's for intentionally disgracing a fully ordained monk. And then there are lesser offenses, dukkata or dupasita, for broader insults or maybe accidental ones, or not directed at a monk specifically.
Okay. And to complete this trio on speech, Pācittiya III focuses on slander, specifically among monks. And let me guess, the Vagga monks are involved.
You guessed it. Once again, they're central. They were apparently spreading tales between monks who were already quarreling, which predictably just made the disputes worse, stirring the pot.
Right.
So this led to the rule against bhikkhu, basically, slandering fellow monks. The offense here hinges on two specific intentions, either trying to gain favor for yourself, pyakamasa, or actively trying to cause division, vidadapayasa. So, for example, running to one monk and telling him another monk called him, say, a kanchala, an outcast, or a fool, with one of those intentions, that incurs a Pācittiya offense. It really highlights the Sangha's commitment to protecting its members' reputations and, fostering internal harmony, carefully regulating the flow of information, essentially.
So looking back at these three speech rules, what's the big takeaway for you, for the listener? It's clearly not just don't lie, it feels like.
Well, it feels like words are seen as the very architecture of the community. Misinformation, gossip, insults, they're not just bad behavior, they're like structural weaknesses that could bring the whole thing down, whether that's an ancient monastic order or, a modern online forum. The wisdom seems fiercely practical. If you want harmony, you have to meticulously guard your tongue.
Well put. It's about conscious communication, really.
All right, let's pivot now to rules governing interactions in living arrangements. Pācittiya V addresses how the dhamma, the teachings, should be taught. Expert, what was the specific issue here?
Okay, so this rule specifically forbids teaching the Dhamma word by word padaso to the unordained. And unordained, or anapasampanna, basically means anyone not fully ordained, so lay people or novices.
Word by word, why was that a problem? Well, again, the Vagga monks were apparently teaching lay followers in this very granular, rote-learning kind of way. And the consequence described is that the lay people started becoming disrespectful towards the monks. Perhaps the teaching method diminished the perceived value or sacredness. So the core of the rule, padasodhammapaseya, is about teaching word by word, syllable by syllable, maybe even by inference, in a way that implies rote memorization without deeper understanding. It suggests this wasn't about withholding knowledge, but more a concern for maintaining the reverence of the Dhamma and ensuring its proper, respectful transmission.
So it was about the manner of teaching.
Exactly. The offense is described as immediate, per word or syllable, if done inappropriately. Though, interestingly, reciting together, like in a group chant or correcting texts, those were fine.
Okay. Next up, Pācittiya VIII, about sleeping arrangements. This one apparently has an interesting amendment story.
It does, yes. Initially, the rule simply forbade a monk from sleeping with an unordained person in shared quarters, full stop. This came about because some novice monks were sleeping in the same hall as lay followers, and their behavior was described as unmindful, naked, making noise, scratching, basically not very composed.
Huh. Sounds like typical dorm life, maybe.
Perhaps, but it caused public complaints. So the initial rule was quite strict. However, it was later amended. This happened because of the Venerable Rahula, who was actually the Buddha's son. Apparently, he couldn't find a bed one time and ended up having to sleep in a latrine hut. The Buddha found him there.
Oh, dear. Not ideal.
Not ideal at all. And this incident led to a clarification, an amendment. A monk is permitted to sleep with an unordained person, specifically a male here, for a period of the Virata Terata.
Which means?
2 or 3 nights. Beyond that, it becomes a Pācittiya offense.
So a bit of flexibility was introduced then, based on a practical problem.
Exactly. It shows a practical consideration creeping into the code. It allows for short-term shared accommodation, maybe during travel or festivals, while setting a clear limit for longer periods to avoid those earlier problems. And the rule applies regardless of who lies down first, or if they get up and lie down again. It's about sharing the space overnight for that duration.
Now, what's striking, as you mentioned, is Pācittiya VI, about sleeping with a woman. The boundary seems much, much stricter here. This rule came from an incident with Venerable Anuruddha. He shared a lodging with a woman. She tried to seduce him. He resisted impeccably. But the mere fact they shared quarters caused concern. Why such a stark difference compared to sharing with a man?
Yes, the difference is significant. The rule states a monk commits a Pācittiya offense if he tugamena sahazeya kapea, essentially, sleeps with a human female in shared quarters. And the definition of matugamo, human female, is exceptionally broad. It explicitly includes any human female, even a newborn baby girl.
Even a baby. Wow.
Yes. Though it specifically excludes non-human entities like female spirits or animals, sleeping with those would be a lesser dukkata offense, apparently. But crucially, unlike the rule for unordained men, there is no 2 or 3 nights allowance here for women. Zero tolerance for sharing enclosed sleeping quarters.
So it wasn't just about potential misconduct, but maybe the appearance of it. Scandal.
Precisely. It reflects the monastic code's much stricter boundary, likely due to the perceived greater potential for sexual misconduct, or, just as importantly, the appearance or rumor of scandal, which could seriously damage the Sangha's reputation. The seriousness with which potential sexual misconduct, or even just the perception of it, was treated is really paramount in this rule. Exemptions are very limited, like if the space isn't enclosed or if one person is sitting while the other lies down.
Okay. And finally, in this section, a rule about teaching Dhamma to women, Pācittiya VII. This one also saw quite an evolution, didn't it?
It did, yes. Another great example of the rules adapting over time. The initial problem came up when Venerable Uday was teaching Dhamma, whispering it, apparently to a householder woman and her daughter-in-law. This led to suspicion and gossip among the women themselves about his intentions. Was he teaching Dhamma or something else?
Ah, the whispering probably didn't help perceptions.
Likely not. So this initially led to a blanket prohibition. Monks simply couldn't teach Dhamma to women. But then the laywomen complained. They said, well, how can we learn the Dhamma if the monks won't teach us? A fair point.
A very fair point.
So this led to an amendment. Monks were then allowed to teach women, but only for Shapanyaka Ahi.
Which translates to
5 or 6 words.
5 or 6 words. It's barely a sentence. That's not much of a lecture, is it?
No, not at all. But wait, the story doesn't end there. Those Chabagya monks.
Oh, them again. Resourceful lot.
Very. They found a loophole. They would apparently sit a non-discerning man. The text calls him Avinyu Pirisavigahai nearby, someone who wouldn't really understand what was being said. And then they'd lecture the women at length, claiming they were technically following the rule because a man was present, even if he was clueless.
Huh. That's gaming the system.
Absolutely. So this prompted the final amendment. The rule now specifies that teaching a woman for more than 5 or 6 words is an offense unless anyatra vinyuna piris vigahina, unless a discerning man is present. And a discerning man is defined as someone capable of understanding, well-spoken versus ill-spoken words, serious matters versus minor ones, basically a proper chaperone who understands the content.
Wow. That whole evolution really shows the practical, adaptive nature of the rulemaking, trying to balance spiritual access for women with concerns about propriety and public perception.
Exactly. It's a constant negotiation.
Reflecting on these interaction rules, teaching, sleeping arrangements, we really see this meticulous effort to navigate the social norms of the time, right? And to prevent situations or even just rumors that could undermine the spiritual path or the public's trust in the Sangha.
Yes, it's very much about protecting the community's integrity, both internally and how it's perceived externally.
Okay, let's move into our final segment. Let's delve into rules that touch on integrity and public perception, including one that, maybe surprisingly, could be seen as an early form of environmental ethics. Let's start with Pācittiya VIII. This concerns the declaration of superhuman attainments. What's the story behind this one?
Right. This rule emerged during a difficult time, a severe famine. There were monks living by the Vagga River, and they, strategically started praising each other's supposed spiritual attainments, like deep meditation states or insights to the local lay people. And the goal was clearly to secure more alms, more food donations. And apparently it worked. They became noticeably better fed compared to other monks suffering through the famine.
Ah, so using spiritual status for material gain.
Precisely. And this incident led to the rule that a monk commits a Pācittiya offense if he anupasampanasa utari manusadama arosheya butasme Pācittiyanti, which means he declares a superhuman attainment to an unordained person, even if it's true.
Wait, hang on. Even if it's true, why on earth would you prohibit stating a truth, especially a spiritual truth? That seems really counterintuitive.
It is fascinating, isn't it? And Utari Manusadama covers a wide range of profound spiritual states, meditative absorptions, stages of liberation, abandoning defilements, and so on. The crucial bit is butasmiya, meaning when it is true. So why prohibit stating a fact It seems to be about maintaining humility, first and foremost, preventing spiritual boasting, or, as in the origin story, manipulation for material gain. It ensures that offerings from lay people are given out of genuine faith in the Dhamma, in the path itself, not as some kind of transaction in exchange for perceived spiritual power from a particular monk.
I see. It safeguards the purity of the practice and the relationship with lay supporters, protecting it from being exploited.
Exactly. And there's a lesser offense, a dukkata, if a monk attributes such attainments to another monk, to an unordained person, or explicitly links attainments to offerings received. Interestingly, declaring these truths to other fully ordained monks is generally permitted.
Okay, that makes more sense. Next, Pācittiya IX. This deals with a really sensitive issue, disclosing another monk's serious offense. What's the background there?
You might guess who's involved again.
Let me guess. The Vagga monks.
Bingo. They were central to this one too. They apparently publicly exposed the fact that another monk, the Venerable Upananda Sakiputta, was undergoing probation for a serious monastic transgression. And they did this quite deliberately, in front of lay followers during a meal gathering.
Wow, that's quite the breach of confidence.
Absolutely. And it led to the rule against bhikkhusa duhula apatti anupasampanasa arocheya anyatra bhikkhusamutya, which means, basically, disclosing a monk's duhula apatti, that means a serious offense. Specifically, the parajika or sagdisasa categories, the really heavy ones, disclosing that to an unordained person without the bhikkhusamutya.
Which isn't.
Authorization from the monastic community, from the Sangha itself.
So they really prioritize internal handling, rehabilitation, and privacy for the monk involved. But I wonder, what about the trust of the lay community? If serious offenses were kept entirely internal, wouldn't that risk undermining public confidence if word somehow got out anyway?
That's a really important tension, and one the Sangha clearly grappled with. You see it in the rule itself. It definitely emphasizes discretion, protecting the privacy and the rehabilitation process, ensuring these matters are handled internally first. But it does allow for disclosure with community authorization, samittiya. The text even details various forms of authorization, like permission to speak to certain households or about certain aspects. And it stresses that even with permission, going beyond its specific scope, like revealing more offenses than permitted or talking to more people than allowed, still incurs the offense.
So it's a controlled disclosure when deemed necessary by the community.
Exactly. It shows a strong emphasis on internal discipline and supporting the monk's path to correction, while also acknowledging that sometimes authorized disclosure might be necessary for justifiable reasons, presumably including maintaining overall trust.
Okay. And finally, a rule that might surprise some listeners, Pācittiya X, which concerns digging the earth. You mentioned this might be seen as early environmental ethics.
Yes, it's quite remarkable. The incident behind it involved monks in a place called Avuvi. They were digging the ground or getting others to dig it for them, probably for construction work. This led lay people to complain, and their complaint was specific. They said the monks were harming one-facultied living beings within the earth.
One-facultied living beings in the earth. What does that mean?
It implies a perception of some form of life or sentience even in the soil itself. This led to the rule. Yopana bikupateva kanshea vakanchapeva on offense for digging or causing to be dug the earth. And what's absolutely fascinating here is the incredibly detailed classification of earth they developed. They distinguish between two types. Jatapathavi, which means born earth. This is defined as things like pure dust, pure clay, soil with few stones, unburnt earth, or even a pile of dust or clay that has accumulated naturally for more than 4 months. This type was seen as containing that subtle life. And then there's Ajatapathavi, unborn earth. This includes things like pure stones, gravel, sand, burnt earth or ash, or very recent piles of dust. This type was considered permissible to dig.
So it's not just a general don't harm nature rule, but a highly specific ethical sensitivity towards certain types of soil based on a perception of inherent life.
Precisely. The actual Pācittiya offense applies to digging, breaking, or even booning born earth, whether you do it yourself or instruct someone else. There's a lesser dukkata offense if you're unsure whether the earth is born or unborn. It really reveals this ancient, meticulous ethical sensitivity towards the natural environment, a kind of implicit recognition of subtle forms of life, or perhaps potential for life, even in what we might consider inanimate today. It's genuinely an early form of ecological consciousness, rooted in specific observations and beliefs.
These final rules, then, they really span everything from personal spiritual integrity, not boasting about attainments, to communal discretion, handling wrongdoing carefully, and even this surprising environmental awareness. It highlights such a holistic approach to conduct, doesn't it? It shows a commitment not just to internal purity, but also to external perception, the reputation of the community, and the subtle impact of one's actions on the world around you.
Absolutely. It's about maintaining trust, preventing scandal, and demonstrating respect, really, for all forms of perceived life and for the integrity of the community itself.
So we've journeyed through these 10 fascinating Pācittiya rules today. What really stands out to you as we wrap up? For me, it's that incredible level of detail, the classification, and just the subtle ways these rules were clearly trying to shape a harmonious, ethical community day to day. They weren't just static laws. They felt like living, breathing guidelines that adapted over time to real-world challenges, constantly emphasizing intention, reputation, and that delicate balance between strict spiritual practice and navigating daily life.
I agree. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, these texts aren't just, historical curiosities collecting dust. They offer some pretty profound insights, I think, into the universal challenges of human interaction, the dangers of unchecked speech, the absolute importance of integrity, the need for clear boundaries, and even that ancient form of, let's call it, environmental ethics. They show a community genuinely grappling with practical problems, but through a deeply moral and spiritual lens, and often really valuing communal well-being and public trust above individual desires, or even what might seem like efficiency sometimes.
That's a great point.
And it really raises an important question for us today, doesn't it? What might our world, our communities, our online spaces look like if we approached our own rules of conduct with maybe a similar level of precision, adaptability, and that deep consideration for their wider consequences?
Indeed. Think about how often modern organizations, or even just our individual lives, run into serious problems because of, well, unchecked speech or lack of discretion, or maybe just disregarding the subtle impacts of our actions. These ancient rules, they really challenge us, I think, to reflect on those often unseen ripple effects of our words and actions, and what it truly means to build any community, ancient or modern, that's genuinely founded on integrity and mutual respect. Definitely something to mull over until our next deep dive.